Oh, I'm sorry, did something Star Wars related happen? I hadn't noticed, for you see I have been on Mars for the past month. So, yeah, Disney bought Lucasfilm, which basically means that they bought Star Wars. I'm sure they bought a bunch of other stuff too, but everybody knows the main reason they paid all that money was so they could have Star Wars. Honestly, for me, the biggest deal of this is not so much that someone else now owns all the toys or that they're planning to make more movies, but that the whole thing actually managed to take all of us by total surprise. I mean, they announced they were moving ahead on Episode 7 just hours after they broke the initial news, and later that day it comes out that this has been in the works, involving one of the largest entertainment companies in the history of the world and what might be the most endlessly scrutinized property in the entirety of nerd culture, for over a year, and nobody talked. No rumors, no leaks, no gossip, no messages, no odd sightings of George Lucas on the Disney Studios lot. Nothing. Zip. Zilch. The director of the CIA can't hide his mistress. But this people manage to keep secret until the day of. That never happens anymore. Do you have any idea how scary Disney's internal security must be? But okay, pretty huge deal as far as the Byzantine Hollywood business dealing world goes, but I'm not really sure what anyone wants me to say about it beyond that. Until they've got a director, a script, a cast, etc., the whole thing is just theoretical. Obviously, Star Wars is a massive part of the popular culture and of my generation in particular, but at this point, all that's really happened is that some names and numbers moved from one ledger to another, symbolizing the mass migration of billions of dollars. But then again, bigger picture, I guess this really is a pretty huge deal in terms of pop history, the media, etc. On the one hand, it's actually a little sad in terms of broad cultural symbolism when you think about it. This is pretty much the after-the-fact death knell for a certain kind of Hollywood independent filmmaking. People forget this because it never quite lived up to its own potential, but the whole point of Lucasfilm was to be a real-world rebel base. A self-contained operation that could perform the tasks of a studio without all the corporate oversight. And even though Lucas has yet to make good on his purported desire to reinvent himself as a born-again indie auteur, the idea of that particular energy being crated up and sold to one of the ultimate corporate conglomerates is one of those, guess this is just how it is now, moments in this world. Then again, the Lucasfilm of yesterday is not the Lucasfilm of today, and the Disney of today is certainly not the Disney of yesterday. There's not really much daylight between Star Wars, the way it ought to have been done, and a lot of the big movies Disney has been making lately. 15, maybe 10 years ago, finding out something you really liked was moving under the Disney umbrella would have been cause to sulk, but given how swimmingly their stewardship of, say, Marvel Comics and the Muppets have gone, I'm not too worried about it at this point. A studio that says, yeah, sure, let's hand the linchpin of the most ambitious production experiment since The Lord of the Rings to a relatively untexted TV fixture, and then rolls the dice, frankly feels a lot closer in temperament to the George Lucas who made Star Wars than the George Lucas who made The Phantom Menace felt. Also, I imagine probably the biggest, most immediate net positive to come of this whole thing will be that since Disney likes to wring every last penny it can out of everything it owns, except this, there's basically no reason for them to maintain Lucas' irritating stance on historical revisionism. It's probably a pretty damn safe bet that we will not be denied remastered, uncut, pre-special edition versions of the original trilogy on Blu-ray for much longer, and there's nothing wrong with that. As for the prospective new movies themselves, well, there's one thing I do feel pretty confident in predicting. If you're assuming they'll be dipping into or even acknowledging the so-called expanded universe, yeah, that's probably not gonna happen. Quality or lack thereof of the EU material aside, Lucasfilm only ever paid the barest attention to it for the most part, and trust me, Disney did not just pay all that money to make movies based on what is essentially authorized assembly line fan fiction for a comparatively small audience. So if I were you, I'd start getting used to the idea that there's now going to be 2 post-Jedi timelines, because that's probably what's gonna happen. I will say this much, I hope they don't try and farm these out to established, well-known genre directors. When you've got something like Star Wars that's going to be heavily producer-driven and automatically guaranteed to turn a profit, the right thing to do is turn the directing chair over to fresh, new talent who will go at it with enthusiasm because they're trying to launch careers of their own. Failing that, at least think outside the box. Not to keep going back to this well, but the Marvel guys turned out to be pretty inspired, putting some of their biggest guns in the hands of a guy who made mostly comedies, an old-school journeyman, and a classical English dramatist. One thing is for certain, though. There's actually going to be more Star Wars movies, and I'm actually excited about seeing more Star Wars movies. Those are 2 things I honestly never thought I'd be able to say again. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.